Governor, I think you suggested at one point that one of the contributing factors that might have moved you into public life was your experience in Italy in 1943. What was that specifically?
Well, I went to Italy on a mission for President Roosevelt, an economic mission behind the armies in the fall of 1943. And I read in the Stars and Stripes, the newspaper published for the soldiers, the result of a public opinion poll. It said that 7 out of 10 parents would not want a son of theirs to enter public service as a career. It was all right for them to fight and die, if need be, for what we believed in the United States, but it wasn't right for them to work for it in peacetime. This seemed to me a curious and foolish contradiction. And I suppose one of the problems that anybody in public life has is to try to restore respect for politics and politicians. How can you respect, how can young people respect, let alone have any confidence in leadership of politicians, if the word has become a word of contempt, a word of derision? And this, if you please, in the land of Jefferson and of Lincoln. The responsibility then of anybody practicing this most difficult and also most, in many ways, rewarding and satisfying art is to improve its quality, to maintain the respect and esteem on which its success must depend. And we owe this not only to the system that we serve, but we owe it to the continuity of the society that we believe in, that we fight for, that we die for. I think you can call it just good government. You can call it by some simple term that good government is the best politics and so on. You can say that public office is a public trust. You can say that corruption in public office is a national offense, and so on and so forth. Call it what you please. It's this element of decency, and in much the larger sense, which is courage. Courage to do the right thing in public office is often at the price of the office, and it's the hardest thing in the world. I can think personally of no worse punishment than somehow to be permanently confronted with one's own cowardice. And yet this is exactly what many a politician has to confront. And the result is that his conscience gets corroded. He has made compromises. He has submitted to injustices or to wrongs so often, merely to accomplish his design, to hold his office and that sort of thing. It's a very hard thing. It's not just the simple corruption of dollars on the barrelhead. It's a much more intricate and a much more intimate and a much more dangerous and a much more corrupting thing than that.
I looked up the word candidate the other day, and I find that the derivation of the term candidate is from candidatorum, the Latin, and it was so used to indicate white robes, and that the candidates who ran for the Roman Senate were dressed in white togas, which were supposed to be reflective of the purity of their principle and concept.
Well, maybe we ought to dress all of us politicians up in white robes nowadays. You remember there's a wonderful line of Dante's. It says something like this, that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in a time of moral crisis, preserve their neutrality.
Well, it appears that we can afford no less than leaders of total imagination and vision at this stage of history.
I'd say that even almost more fundamental than imagination and vision is the quality of character. Just this capacity to be brave in the pinches is condition number one. And then to make progress, of course, you've got to have imagination, you've got to have vision, you've got to be able to translate futures, if you please, into current action. Words are so easy. Action is so difficult. To proclaim one's beliefs, to profess one's convictions, is one thing. To enact them, to do them, to face the hard, ugly realities, the difficulty of getting things done, is quite another. These are the tests, I suppose.
Well, Governor, last year you talked before the Smith College commencement, and I believe that the subject that you spoke on was the importance of being an educated housewife. Do I hear repercussions that there were some repercussions?
Well, there were some, I think. I had a double motive. Not only was I discharging my responsibility to address the graduating class of Smith College on what a girl can do to keep her husband alive and animated and eager and participating in this world that we live in, but I also was preaching to my daughter-in-law-to-be. She was in this class, and I thought that this was a good time for me to get in some licks on her.
Did she realize for whom the bells toll?
Well, I don't know, but she has been very sweet about it and told me that it was admirable advice, and there was no doubt but what she would fulfill every jot and tittle of it. And she has, I must say. One of the points I was trying to make several points there. Basically, it was that everybody, wants to be a part of our generation. They want to be in it and they want to participate in it. But many girls are going to have to act for a good many years the role of mother and housewife. But they can do an awful lot by reading and reflection to keep their minds clear of the corruptions of conformity. I was really making a speech, a plea, if you please, for the inquiring mind, and not for submissive subjugation by the tendency to conform and be like everybody else and to accept the group attitudes of the group in which you move. And that a girl can do an awful lot to help a young man who is totally preoccupied with the job of earning a living to protect his intellectual vitality and independence.
Are you satisfied at this point with your daughter-in-law's progress chart?
I'm satisfied with her in every respect. What's more, her husband is, too.
Governor, I know that you certainly don't want to be thought of as an elder statesman to anybody, or be put in the role of giving advice to the youth. You avoid that. As a matter of fact, I noticed that in this address that you gave at Princeton to the graduating class 1954, you made some points about that. You said, 32 years ago, my classmates and I graduated into a world that was quite different from the one you enter in 1954. Nor do I need to enumerate for you in sepulchral tones the problems that you face. And don't we state them in sepulchral tones?
Well, that seems to be the habit of commencement orators. Yeah.
But you said to the students, you know only too well what those problems are. Perhaps you can solve them. I wouldn't presume to tell you how to do it. This university has given you the tools with which to try. Moreover, even if I would guide you, I could not. And this is the thing I have reference to. What a man knows at 50 that he did not know at 20 is, for the most part, incommunicable. Mm-hmm. And then you went on to enumerate that what he knows at 50 that he did not know at 20 boils down to something like this. The knowledge he has acquired with age is not the knowledge of formulas or forms of words, but of people, places, action. A knowledge not gained by words, but by touch, sight, sound, victories, failures, sleeplessness, devotion, love. And those are big words, Governor.
Yes,
very
large words.
The human experiences and emotions of this earth and of oneself and of other men. And perhaps, too, a little faith and a little reverence for the things you cannot see.
Well, these are the things I think you learn with age. Perhaps the last is the most important. The belief in some transcendent power, which I think comes to our rescue in times of need. And all of these things that you can piously say that we're wiser as we get older and that we've learned so much more. I wonder if it's that so much as we've just had more experience, and perhaps there have been areas open to us of spiritual depth, of perception, of understanding, of reliance that we can't have until we have, well, call it earned it or worked our way there. Maybe that's it.
About your meeting with FDR in 1941, I think you saw him on board ship.
No, I was supposed to see him on board ship,
you have
but
a
I
little
was
difficulty
grounded. My plane never got there, and I was sent on a mission out to, this was right on his way back to shore from the cruiser Augusta from the Atlantic Conference with Churchill. And I had just come to work for my boss, Frank Knox, the Secretary of the Navy, and we had a great crisis. It was a taking over of a shipyard that was strike-bound up in New Jersey, and it was the first time the government had moved in to take over an industrial plant. This was 6 months before the war broke out, and I was dispatched to meet the president coming in from the Atlantic Conference and fly out to sea and land alongside. It was very dramatic. But I got up there, and my airplane was grounded, and I had to commandeer passing farmer to take me into town to try to meet him as he came off the ship to tell him about the executive order that we wanted him to sign. And by the time I got into town, the special train had started, so I missed him again. I thought by this time I was going to be drawn and quartered. Convicted and hung by the time I got back for failing to perform my mission. But I finally caught up with him in Portland, Maine. And we talked it all over, and he calmly assured me that he'd read everything and we'd settle it all the next day. Which we did. I thought it was a great experience. I had also a mission to perform on that occasion that amused me a good deal. As I think back on it now, at the time it seemed very solemn indeed. We'd heard in the Navy that Hitler and Stalin had started to negotiate, which would have been, of course, the most dramatic event, the capitulation of the Russians to the Nazis. This was in August of 1941. And I was told to communicate this news to the president, but no one else was to hear what I had to say. The president was surrounded by a number of his friends, including his wife and his doctor and his secretary and Harry Hopkins. I couldn't communicate it in the presence of his most intimate friends because these were my orders, and I was going to execute my orders explicitly. And he looked at me quizzically and said, "Well, Adlai, I think you can safely tell me right here in the presence of these people." They didn't show any signs of getting up and leaving us alone. And finally I said, "Well, sir, my instructions were not to tell anybody." So I wrote it out on the back of the menu, leaning over his shoulder and handed it to him. I was never so confused. I was covered with confusion and embarrassed as I could be. He read it and looked up at me and said, "Well, you know, I just don't believe that. Do you, Adlai?" Golly, I didn't know what to say. I bit my lip and said, "Well, you know, I just don't know whether I believe it or not, Mr. President." Then I turned around, beat a retreat, and walked straight into a closed door.
Well, Governor, that was quite an ending to an auspicious meeting. My goodness. And on quite another subject, I know of your interest in the classic English writers. Your favorite, I gather, is Sir Walter Scott. But recently I came upon a narrative poem by an Elizabethan figure who's primarily known today because he has a tobacco named after him, and also because he spread his cloak over the mud to ensure the Queen's safe crossing. I think this poem has much contemporary value, and I thought perhaps some of the verses would interest you a great deal. They're from Sir Walter Raleigh's The Lie.
There's some wonderful lines here, I think, that have total appropriateness today. "Go, soul, the body's guest, upon a thankless errand." Now, that's a word we don't even use anymore.
Exactly.
"Fear not to touch the best, the truth shall be thy warrant. Go, since I needs must die, and give the world a lie. Tell men of high condition that manage the estate, their purpose is ambition, their practice only hate. And if they once reply, then give them all the lie. Tell zeal it wants devotion, tell love it is but lust, tell time it is but motion, tell flesh it is but dust, and wish them not reply, for thou must give the lie. Tell fortune of her blindness, tell nature of decay, tell friendship of unkindness, tell justice of delay, and if they will reply, then give them all the lie. Tell arts they have no soundness, but vary by esteeming. Tell schools they want profoundness, and stand too much on seeming. If arts and schools reply, give arts and schools the lie. Tell faith it's fled the city, tell how the country erreth. Tell manhood shakes off pity, tell virtue least preferreth. And if they do reply, spare not to give the lie. So when thou hast, as I commended thee, done blabbing, although to give the lie deserves no less than stabbing, yet stab at thee that will, no stab the soul can kill. Excellent. That really is a beautiful reading of, I think, a potent and incisive discourse on the affairs of his day.
even though with a jaundiced eye, since he apparently had been sentenced to die on the gallows.
Yes, he was very bitter, wasn't he? But I hope we don't have many people quite as embittered as Walter Raleigh was on the eve of his execution.
It seems to me that it somehow mirrors a part of all of us, either our disregard of the institutions we have or our misuse of them. And it's on that basis that I found the narrative particularly interesting.
I wish I knew more about Walter Raleigh. He lived at the apex of an age of versatility of which I think we've had few counterparts in recent years. Age of Marlowe, of Shakespeare, Fletcher, Beaumont, so many of the great creative writers of the English language who flourished in this extraordinary period of versatility. Education was very good, for those who had any education.
Yes, it seems as though the development of idea was particularly strong at that time, but it certainly appears to us, doesn't it, that the need for idea is probably greater today than it was then.
Well, I think need for faith and respect and confidence in institutions, too. Of course, we've made some progress in that direction, I think, so that much of the bitterness that's reflected here perhaps is no longer relevant. Like tell arts, they have no soundness, but vary by esteeming. Tell schools they want profoundness and stand too much on seeming.
On what seems rather than what is.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Tell fortune of her blindness, tell nature of decay, tell friendship of unkindness, tell justice of delay. Our problem of adequate administration of justice is ever present with us. The problem of relating friendship to a genuine kindness and all of the hypocrisies common then are common today. I like the line, tell zeal, it wants devotion. But there's quite a difference between devotion and zeal. I've seen many people who are zealous in a cause, but the extent to which they had genuine devotion, genuine respect, genuine, if you please, religious faith and confidence and conviction, is quite a different thing from the zealousness of their behavior.
It was interesting, too, the verse where he says, tell men of high condition that manage the estate. I wonder what relevance that would have on contemporary affairs.
Well, it says here, tell men of high condition that manage the estate. Their purpose is ambition, their practice only hate. That's the sort of bitterness in the thing that I can understand, I suppose, in his case, but if I know anything of his life, but that I hope it doesn't characterize all of us who have had a part in public life and in the management of the estate, so to speak, in our generation, that there's such a thing as having a respect for public office and for public responsibility that reflects something more than ambition.
But isn't that the purpose of his discourse on that premise, that to remind men of high condition who manage our estates just what responsibility they have in wielding that tremendous power?
I suppose that's what it meant. Of course, he denounces them here in inclusive terms. A total state, give it all the lie,
exactly.
All of its servants. So their purpose is ambition and their practice is hate.
Well, it appears that he would like to destroy the whole thing and start over again. And it looks as though we're faced with that, Governor, doesn't it? With nuclear fission, the hydrogen bomb is a constant threat, but possibly, if we don't use wisdom, we may do just that.
Certainly, we could do just that, and this is a new dimension in man's life and the life of society and civilization, because never before have we had this power of self-destruction as we have it now. I hope that we can make this man's servant and not man's destructive master. Clearly, this must be the test of the maturity of the purpose for which man's intelligence and the evolution of his thinking has been devised. I think we can do it. I think it's a great challenge of this time.
As you mentioned the term self-destruction a while back, the opposite came to my thought as you said it, and that is self-development and self-improvement. We're so prone to think in terms of mass self that in focusing the attention upon mass that we do, don't you think that the individual is likely to have a slight recession of his specific responsibility as a part of the mass?
Yes, you mean the loss of individualism, and it's rather the saving of the individual, the salvation of individualism, it seems to me, the crisis of the times. Whether you speak in political terms, or you speak in scientific terms, or technological, it's apparent that this is an age of mass communication, of newspapers, of magazines, of radio, television, of bigger and bigger business, bigger and bigger aggregations of both of capital and of capital equipment. And I think that in the 19th century we were much more concerned about the place of the individual in society. He was to have something to say about his government, that the individual must have an opportunity to enjoy the good things of life. And we were struggling from the beginning of time almost to ensure man adequate food, adequate clothing, adequate shelter. I think we have conquered most of these traditional specters of hunger, of disease,
yes,
of human misery. I think now we're moving into an entirely new era. And here I think we are changing from the old struggle of the 19th century to the new dimension of the 20th century. The big challenges now are how we make life meaningful, how we make it better in terms of quality rather than in terms merely of quantity. The effect of automation, the increased longevity of man as a result of the wonder drugs and the enormous exciting developments in health are going to make for more and more time in which to enjoy life, and I think make this age also the most exciting perhaps to live in since the Middle Ages.
No question about it.
I think it gives us a great chance, to develop the arts, to develop culture, to develop all of the good things that have been for the few rather than for the many, whether we're just going to go on and want faster automobiles or whether we're going to be able now to move into an era in which we find greater satisfactions in the recreational opportunities of the outdoors, of nature, of music, of literature, of the fine arts, of all of these things, the cultural advantages that the few have enjoyed historically and that are now almost on the threshold of the many. I think it makes it an age almost as golden as the Athenian age of Pericles. But can we do it?
Well, I wonder if we can do it, but I recall a profound biblical statement. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Is that the challenge of our time, primarily?
Only as we have spirituality as an ally can we, in the long term, survive at all. We must find the kingdom of God on earth before we can hope to make this a better kingdom. I've often thought of a line of Edwin Markham's that perhaps you will recall too. He said, "We men of earth have here the stuff of paradise. We have enough. We need no other stones to build the temple of the unfulfilled. Here on the paths of every day, here on the common human way, is all the stuff the gods would take to build a heaven, to mold and make new Edens. Ours the stuff sublime, to build eternity in time."